Skilled and selective empathy, acknowledging responses to adversity and resistance to violence, Dr. Allan Wade, Centre for Response-Based Practice, Duncan, BC, Canada.
Resistance. I just like this photograph.
Resistance and an arrow pointing to weeds growing in concrete cracks.
Here's a more Australian version. This is a quotation from James Scott. Where there is violence, public appearances can be highly misleading. When the grand lord passes, the wise peasant bows deeply and silently farts.
Allan Wade.
If you're standing across the room looking at the wise peasant bowing deeply, you might think, wow, this person is so submissive, they're so passive. Look at them, just bowing to the grand lord. You know, but if you got a little bit closer, you would have a different sense of things. So as in the photograph here, where there's violence and resistance, there is an interaction of some kind. It's not a mutual interaction, but there still is an interaction. And often both the violence and the resistance are underground. There is what James Scott called a hidden transcript of resistance. And if we can create enough dignity and safety with people, they will give us access to the hidden transcript, which will be not only about violence, but crucially will also be about their resistance. So I want to talk to you a little bit about resistance to violence today, and the language, maybe some of the shifts in language we can use to get into that kind of conversation with people. Because my view, our view as a group working in response-based practices, if you do not take into account victims' resistance as a basic premise and make it your business to explore how people already respond to and resist violence, you will also, to some extent at least, be concealing the nature of the violence.
A story on a slide.
So I worked for a woman called Evelyn. A while back, she was referred to me by her husband. Bit of a red flag there. What's going on? How come your husband wanted you to come and see me? Well, he's not so happy. What about? Well, I haven't been putting out. Do you understand that phrase? Yeah. Yes. I say hi to you, you mumble. I say, do you understand putting out? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm getting a bit of a feel for the crowd. So, anyway, so she wasn't putting out. Oh, okay, since when? Well, for a while. How come? I don't like being pushed around. I don't like, you know, it's a bit more complicated than that, the conversation, but that was basically the direction of it. He was controlling money, yelling at her family, humiliating the kids. He wasn't extremely physically violent, but he was humiliating. And so she began to withdraw her affection, to put another phrase to it. And the oddest things started to happen. She forgot to write down the messages when his friends called. She forgot to buy the foods that he liked. And didn't she mess up the cooking of the meals all the time? And her family, who he hated, happened to be over at the house quite regularly, as did her friends. And so she got quite forgetful. And you know, so I said to her, so what you're telling me is you've gone on strike. And she goes, yes, I've gone on strike. So I said, you've been resisting this abusive behavior by your husband for quite some period of time. Where does that kind of strength of spirit come from? Where did you get the kind of determination, you know, and you've been so careful about it to protect your kids. Where does that kind of prudence and clarity of mind come from? Do you have any idea about that? She goes, I don't know. I never thought about that before. Well, I grew up in a drunk house. Everybody passed out. People would come into my room at night, maybe. Maybe that's it. So I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, my parents we had parties all the time. They'd get drunk, everybody'd pass out, and then someone would come into my room. Okay. Sometimes it was my father. So without asking her any more, this is our first interview, without asking her any more about that, I said, so how old were you really? She said, between 8 and 13 or 14 or so. So that's all I learned about what the offenders did, because that's the first time I met her. Do you know what I mean? That could have been quite invasive. So I just asked her, so when that started happening, how did you respond? What did you do? It becomes, you can talk about people's responses often when it's not safe enough to talk about what people did to them. So it provides the beginning of an entry into a conversation. But, you know, the offender's history is the history of violence. The victim's history is the history of resistance. So, you know, victims don't have histories of violence. They have histories of resisting violence. So, so I asked her, so how did you respond? What did you do? And we talked about that for a while, and then when she went away, she journaled because she liked to journal, and this is what she brought to our second session.
Another story.
I'd be crying and pushing my father's hand away, asking him to stop. It got to the point where I'd not go home if the car was not parked outside, or I'd play outside until my mom or older sister got home. She lived a block and a half from school. Took her an hour and a half to get home from school, for which she got the reputation of being absent-minded. But of course, she had a purpose. I remember sleeping with my clothes on. It was my security for a while. By the time they could get my pants undone and down and undo theirs, I'd have my pants up again. I'd sleep on my stomach and lay stiff. If my parents had a drinking party, I'd lay on the outside of my kid sister's covers in bed.
So no one would hurt her.
If they had to get their rocks off, I would rather it be me instead of her. The phenomena of children intervening, responding to protect one another is absolutely widespread. Not only one another, but their parents. The language of children witnessing, children being impacted, children being affected is a minimizing language. Children aren't just witnesses. They experience and they intervene. And our practice frameworks need to reflect that. That's part of restoring dignity to children, acknowledging their agency. You know, I heard a beautiful story yesterday of a man who saw his father punch his mother, and in a terrible situation. He was tiny, and blood came out, and his first impulse, what he did was, he saw his mother there crying. His first impulse was to get a cloth and go over and hold the cloth over his mother's eye. You know, he was 3 years old. So imagine if we engage in practice with young people and we take those actions away from them by not asking her about them or acknowledging them. But what are we doing? That's how you recreate the stereotypical image of the passive victim. It's through our practice. Such people don't exist.
Another part of the story.
She went on, every time they had parties, I slept in my clothes, and sometimes I had a knife in the door frame or under my pillow. When I was 15, I started going to the bar. When men started paying attention to me, it felt good, but I knew what it was they wanted. I'd accept drinks at first, cock tease them, and then tell them to get lost. They'd call me a fucking cock-teasing bitch. I'd say, yeah, and a good one. And she concluded, I'm able to voice my opinion rather than stay quiet. I can tell my husband and others how I feel without feeling guilty. I'll always continue to go forward. She brought that into me in the second session. Now, that isn't going to happen all the time. But when it does happen, you should pay attention. You know? And so, again, you kind of wonder, wow, where did this come from? Now, going to the bar when you're 15 and cock-teasing men, so-called, is not on the list of things you would prescribe for any young person. But of course, what you actually find is that people engage in extraordinary behavior that to us looks like really troubled, maybe shame-based, maybe something else, like cutting, for example, that we would see on the outside as self-destructive, and yet many people who have engaged in that would tell you, if I wasn't doing that, I would have killed myself a long time ago. So we have to be really careful with external judgments and evaluations about the meanings of these actions, and restore them to a context in which the logic of the situation from the person's point of view can become apparent to us. Then we're in a bit of a position to try to arrive at some sort of understanding with the person about the meaning of those responses in a context. So Carolina is asking Karen, 15 years old, can I ask, in those situations and when you were scared and felt like something was wrong, did you feel like you could do something then? The crucial thing here is that she's asking this young person what she did. That focus on actions in a context turns out to be quite important, especially with young people, especially with kids who are 8 or 9. If you ask them how they feel, often that's too abstract. If you ask them what they do, they can tell you. Then ask them how they feel, and they can tell you because they first told you what they did. Now they know how they felt, sort of a thing. So Karen said, no, that was the thing. I was so little and had so many feelings. Sometimes I could say to Daddy, please, Dad, be quiet. Don't be bothered by what Mommy says. I played along with him for a while and played along with him, and I thought, this will help, and pretended that Mommy was the one who was sick. Pretty complicated, hey? This is an example of a teenager who might look to us as though she'd been brainwashed. Initially, on the surface, there she was overtly siding with her dad in order to covertly side with her mom, to protect her mom. So you get a sense of how children are trying to balance these competing demands, so to speak, to put it mildly. Here's a different example from a little boy, 8-year-old Lars, the Swedish example again. Do you remember him hitting Mommy? Definitely. Did that happen a lot? Yes, it was always in the evening. Where would you be? You notice all the questions are about context and interaction? he'd be drawing, he's drawing pictures. This is the living room, and this is my bedroom, and my bed is here, and they'd be fighting right here. They didn't think about the fact that I'd wake up. You never went to your sister's rooms. And he says, no, they, and the word they here means the rooms. No, I couldn't. They were on the second floor, and then here, they means the parents. They would have heard me from the living room. I'd hear them and go and say, Mummy, someone has thrown eggs at the window.
Allan Wade.
Oh, so you interrupted them. Yes, other times I said I had a bad dream. That was the best trick to make them stop. Mummy would come into my room and sleep in my bed. I liked that. And where would your stepdad be? He'd stay outside. So you helped solve the problem. Yes, that was very clever of you. Thanks. I think you'll become an inventor. Yes, that's what I want to be. So what happens here is when you notice how people respond to terrible situations that they cannot really objectively change, it is through that kind of conversation that you most directly come into contact with the capacities, the awareness, the skills, the strength of spirit of the person in a really quite immediate and direct way. We don't have to look for strengths. They're hidden on the surface. We just have to ask the right questions.
Language of affects, impacts, conceals resistance to violence. Dr. Allan Wade.
I'm going to try to persuade you that the language of effects and impacts is a powerful political language that takes us out of the social world and into the mind, that conceals resistance to violence and transforms resistance to violence into effects of violence and symptoms to be treated. So I'm going to try to argue that the prevailing language of the helping professions is a powerful discursive machine that leads us away from victims' responsiveness and into treating victims as affected objects. So we've invented a game to clarify this distinction. Let's say I come over to your house and you've got a house cat called Fluffy. And when you're in the kitchen making cappuccino and not looking, I grab Fluffy by the front and the back and athletically hurl Fluffy through the air.
He mimes throwing the cat.
There goes Fluffy. I know it's a dark fantasy. There goes Fluffy. Now, the motion of Fluffy through the air, effect or response? Is that an effect or a response? It's an effect of the throw. In mid-flight, Fluffy spins around to land on her feet. That's a response. Okay. I'm held up in an armed robbery. Someone hits me upside the head with a baseball bat. I've got a cracked skull. Effect or response? I start bruising. Yes, exactly. It's a response, isn't it? Your body sends blood to the area, but I quibble. I no longer have my money. Effect, right? It's been taken from me. I don't have money to buy my kids Christmas presents. That's an effect. I get angry about that. I lay awake night after night thinking about that. When I walk near that place in the park where I was held up, my heart goes boom, boom, boom. Those are all responses. Okay, you guys are on to this. Violence causes depression or despair. Depression or despair is an impact of violence or an effect. Does that make any more sense? Yeah, no, we're on a slippery slope, aren't we? It doesn't make any more sense. Despair is a cry from the heart, isn't it? It's a response from the spirit, the body, the mind, the soul, the dignity, whatever you want to say, of the person, is it not? Despair is an evaluation of the event as wrong. Emotions are valuations. Are they not? They're valuations of something. They're not just automatically triggered, decontextualized responses from the amygdala. Please, can we move on? You know, these are depression, you know. What a person despairs against tells you what they hope for. Is the person depressed, or are they refusing to be content with abuse?
Allan Wade.
Do you know? It makes a difference how you see that and how you talk about it. So these so-called negative emotions, shame, you can put all the others in the basket, they are responses to, they're not effects of.
Good work with people is a verb fest. Dr. Allan Wade.
So here's how this comes down in practice. Let's say your friend comes up to you and says, oh my God, you won't believe what happened to me at work today. My boss hit on me. Ooh. So you say, you know, you've just been to counseling 305 at the local college. So you know that your job is to track the effects and the impacts of this experience on your friend. So you say, oh my God, how did that affect you? How did that make you feel? So what have you done? Notice the first thing you've done is you've got rid of the verb and you've put a noun in its place. Your friend says, my boss hit on me, good verb phrase. Then you say, how did that? That's a noun. Hit on me becomes that. That's called nominalization, right? That's nouning verbs. Good helping is verbing nouns, not nouning verbs. Good work with people is a verb fest, not a noun fest. We've been creating nouns in people for many, many years, right? Depression is a noun. Refusing to be contented with abuse is a verb. So you've changed a verb phrase into a noun phrase. And so you've lost hitting, you've lost the action of the offender in this case. The other thing you've done, I think more powerfully in a way, is you've changed the topic. Your friend is telling you about an actual social interaction in an actual place and time, in a coffee shop where they work, let's say, and there was an interaction and the boss did something and they would have done something too. And when you say, how did that affect you, where would the effect be? How did that affect you? How did that make you feel? Inside, right? I'm just saying that is a political choice you've made to ask that question. That's politics. What you've done is you've gone from the social world to the mind. You've gone from the concrete to the abstract, from the interactional to the monadic, or the psychological. That's why we've been in the minds of abused women for 125 years trying to change the behavior of abusive men. The language of effects and impacts is part of the political machinery that keeps taking us there, right? This is the issue with trauma-informed practice, which not only does not contain any analysis of victims' resistance, big problem, but also offenders don't commit trauma, offenders commit violence. Trauma's in the mind, right? Let's have violence-informed practice. So let's keep the focus on actions in a context and what that means. That way we're going to learn about the context in the situation. So anyway, the other way that this happens in other, well, let's just say that you skipped out of counseling 305 at the local college that day and you went and hung out with some friends and had a couple of cappuccinos. So then your friend sees you afterward and they say, oh, you won't believe what happened to me. My boss hit on me, ooh. So not knowing that it's your job to track effects and impacts, you ask your friend, oh my God, how did you respond? What did you do? Now your friend tells you, well, there were so many people there, I just got so beat red. It was so embarrassing. I just mumbled something like, I'm sorry, I'm busy on Saturday, and I got the hell out of there, like I need the job. So now your friend can tell you how they made sense of that event, how they responded in the minute, and you'll immediately get a sense that your friend exercised some prudence and some skill and some awareness in getting out of that situation. The language of effects and impacts, how did that make you feel, does not take you there. It takes you away from there. So here's some simple descriptions. Bob punched Sue. The colonial government implemented law to allow theft of indigenous lands. Ever since he could remember, Harold saw his dad beating up his mom, putting her down, telling her she was a piece of shit. So what do you know about Sue and indigenous people and Harold? Not much, hey? You have a sense that something bad was done to them? Some really bad things happened, but you actually don't know anything about the people who the bad things were done to until you find out how they responded. Then you learn who they are.
The subject position.
Sue backed up slowly and closed the door to the bedroom where the children were sleeping. That's the beginning of your safety plan. She knows something about making the kids safe, hey? I wonder what else she knows. What other kinds of things has she done to make the kids safe? Now you build your safety plan on the basis of the one that's already partly underway. Not successful enough, not necessarily where it needs to be, but if you're building on what she already knows, feels, and believes, and does, that's working with, which I think is consistent with the experience of your new practice policy. Indigenous people resisted the theft of their land through rebellion, letters, petitions, protests, and more recently through appeal to the Supreme Court. Now you know something, don't you? That people were not accepting colonial domination. People were resisting it all the way along. And Harold would bring his mom tea in a warm cloth and stay home from school with a stomachache. Now you know a thing or two about Harold. You don't know anything about Harold if you look only at what was done to him. or how he was affected.
Copyright 2015 Family and Community Services.